presentation about my favorite philosopher, Blaise Pascal, and Pascal's wager. Blaise Pascal was a French mathematician, physicist, inventor, writer, and Christian philosopher. He was a child prodigy who was educated by his father, a tax collector in Rouen, from the year 1623, or he lived between 1623 and 1663. I find it interesting that many philosophers chose to contemplate the existence of God. Pascal's wager is an argument based on probability theory and game theory as for why one should live as if God exists, even though this cannot be proved or disproved through reason. Pascal's original formulation of the wager was written down as a fairly short paragraph in pensies amongst several other notes that could be considered wagers. Its argument is rooted in game theory and that the best course of action is to believe in God regardless of any lack of evidence, because that option gives the biggest potential gains. Pascal's original text is long-winded and somewhat convoluted, philosophically speaking, but it can be simplified. 1. If you believe in God and God does exist, you will be rewarded with eternal life, in heaven, thus an infinite gain. If you do not believe in God and God does exist, you will be condemned to remain in hell forever, thus an infinite loss. If you believe in God and God does not exist, you will not be rewarded, thus a finite loss. If you do not believe in God and God does not exist, you will not be rewarded and you will have lived your own life, thus finite gain. The gains and losses associated to outcomes 3 and 4 can be thought of as the opportunity costs of belief in living in accordance to religious norms, since these are typically more restrictive than secular laws. These costs are finite because of human mortality. Mathematically, a finite gain or loss is negligible compared to an infinite gain or loss, as would occur during an eternal life. Therefore, Pascal concluded that it was much better choice to believe in God rather than not. The wager can also be seen in table form and becomes clear that belief gives you a reward or practically nothing, while belief gives you punishment or nothing. Existence of afterlife and soul is the center of the problem. Pascal's wager assumes the afterlife can exist. However, all the evidence points towards a physical person. What is the soul that exists after death? Such a part would have to be non-biological and non-modifiable, and no such parts exist. Our thoughts, feelings, memories, and personality have been shown to come from interactions in the brain. They can be affected by hormones, drugs, alcohol, head trauma, and other physical factors. No amount of philosophical speculation can change this. For an analogy, let's say you, by the way, don't do this at home, dropped your computer from a four-story building, ran over the remains 8 times, and dropped the remains in the ocean. Is the computer still running Windows in another plane of existence? Probably not, because the computer has no mind or soul. Take Socrates. Several philosophers had opinions about the existence of God, and for example, Socrates is described as hearing an inner voice that he believed was God's. He believed that the universe was guided by a God with a sense of purpose, a God that was the source of human consciousness and morality, macrohistory, and world timeline. Melding philosophy and religion, Plato believed that the highest activity of an individual was to contemplate the beauty of God and the immorality of his own soul. Aristotle, similar to the Hindus, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle believed that the pursuit of knowledge moved one closer to harmony with God. Take Thomas Hobbes. Hobbes was assumed to be an atheist, but of course contemplated God's existence. John Locke, in his opinion, the cosmological argument was valid and proved God's existence. His political thought was based on a particular set of Protestant Christian assumptions. Although Locke was an advocate of tolerance, he urged the authorities not to tolerate atheism because he thought the denial of God's existence would undermine the social order and lead to chaos. Along with Pascal's wagers, I feel that my very favorite movie, The Bucket List, follows along these lines. In The Bucket List, Morgan Freeman plays Carter and Jack Nicholson plays Edward. They have a discussion about God's existence. To me, this reflects the underlying thoughts of Pascal's wager. Carter says, "It's indescribably beautiful." Edward says, "I love flying over the polar cap above the desolation." Carter says, "The stars, it really is one of God's good ones." Edward says, "So you think a being of some sort did all this?" Carter says, "You don't?" Edward says, "You mean, do I believe if I look up in the sky and promise this or that, the biggie will make this all go away?" No. Carter says, "Then 95% of the people on Earth are wrong." Edward says, "If life has taught me anything, it's that 95% of people are always wrong." Carter says, "It's called faith." Edward says, "I honestly envy people who have faith. I just can't get my head around it." Carter says, "Maybe your head's in the way." Edward says, "Carter, we've all had hundreds of these discussions, and every one of them always hits the same wall. Is there sugar from Perry or not? And nobody has gotten over that wall." Carter says, "So what do you believe?" Edward says, "I resist all beliefs." Carter says, "No Big Bang, random universe?" Edward says, "We live, we die, and the wheels on the bus go round and round." Carter says, "What if you're wrong?" Edward says, "I'd love to be wrong. If I'm wrong, I win." And they both laughed. Carter says, "I'm not sure it works that way." Edward says, "Well, you're not claiming to know something I don't." Carter says, "I just have faith." According to Palmer in our textbook from page 153, Theism, the Ontological Argument, Anselm of Canterbury, who lived between 1033 and 1109, speaking of God, "There is no doubt that there exists a being that which nothing greater can be conceived, and it exists both in the understanding and reality." René Descartes, from our textbook Palmer on page 159, refers to Descartes said 500 years after Anselm's version. 1. God by definition is that being that is absolutely perfect. 2. It is more perfect to exist than not to exist. 3. Therefore, to conceive of God is necessarily to conceive of him as existing. 4. Therefore, to say God does not exist is to contradict oneself. 5. Therefore, the sentence God exists is necessarily true. St. Thomas Aquinas, who lived between 1225 and 1274, according to our textbook on page 166, The Cosmological Argument, Thomas Aquinas said, number 1, every event in the observable world is caused by some prior event to it. 2, either the series of causes is infinite, or B, series of causes goes back to the first cause, which is itself uncaused. 3, but an infinite series of causes is impossible. 4, therefore a first cause exists outside the observable world. This first cause is God. Palmer goes on to explain the theological argument on page 170. The universe is such an intricate system of balanced mechanisms that it can be explained only in terms of purposes and intentions of the intelligent creator. As in the case of the watch, in the case of the universe, that intelligent creator is God. So now let's consider a developing baby in the womb. Consider human life, such intricacies. What other being besides God would have a man and a woman who can come together and create such wonders from a single cell? Take the Grand Canyon. Who else could have created something so grand and sprawling? Consider the hummingbird. There are more than 325 hummingbird species in the world. Any of us that would have invented the hummingbird probably wouldn't have created 325 of them. Hummingbirds cannot walk, hop, though their feet can be used to scoot sideways. The hummingbird's maximum forward flight is 30 miles per hour, though the birds can reach up to 60 miles per hour in a dive. A hummingbird's wings beat between 50 and 200 flaps per second, depending on the direction of the flight and air conditions. An average hummingbird's heart rate is more than 1,200 beats per minute. At rest, a hummingbird takes an average of 250 breaths per minute. The rufous hummingbird has the longest migration of any hummingbird species, with a distance of more than 3,000 miles from a bird's nesting grounds in Alaska and Canada to its winter habitat in Mexico. The ruby-throated hummingbird flies 500 miles nonstop across the Gulf of Mexico during both its spring and fall migrations. Consider Darwin's theory. If we evolved from apes, why are there still apes? So consider the bumblebee. The bumblebee is probably not something that man would have created. It's amazing that this odd insect is able to fly at all. According to Science Daily, believe it or not, there are about 950,000 species of insects. No one knows for sure how many species of animals exist on the earth. In fact, some 10,000 species of animals are discovered every year, with over 1.5 million species already discovered. About 8.7 million, give or take 1.3 million, is the new estimated total number of species on Earth, the most precious calculation ever offered, with 6.5 million species on land and 2.2 in the oceans. Announced by the Census of Marine Life, the figure is based on a new analytical technique. The number of species on Earth has been estimated previously at 3 million to 100 million. Why would man have a reason to create so many? I believe that all species have a purpose, and this purpose in creation was done by God. I don't think that the human mind is capable to understand all the reasons why or comprehend how everything was created. One more reason to know that God is in charge and He is amazing. The Aurora Borealis. Too beautiful for words. I believe that this is one of God's bonus creations for us. I believe that the other philosophers who I've presented, other than Hobbes, would probably agree with Pascal. So I believe that Blaise Pascal is my favorite philosopher. I think that his wager was an intelligent one, and for me, a sure bet. Thank you very much.